In the year 2000, a small cartoon joke named a man as a future president, and 16 years later that man won the job. A hidden sign on a building quietly spelled out who would buy a movie studio 20 years before it happened. A line of math scribbled behind a foolish dad brushed up against one of the deepest secrets in all of science. For more than 30 years, The Simpsons has kept lining up with the real world in ways that feel almost impossible, and nearly every time the truth behind it turns out to be stranger and softer than any magic trick. Tonight there is nothing to solve and nowhere to be. Just 10 of the show's most famous myths, predictions, and quiet secrets, told slowly and gently, each one true, and each one a little stranger than the last. So get comfortable, let your shoulders drop, and breathe slow. Welcome to Yellowfan. Let's get started. The cartoon that named a president. The Simpsons has been on television for a very long time. It began back in 1989, and it is still running today, with hundreds and hundreds of episodes behind it. Over all those years, the show slowly built up a strange little reputation. People began to notice that things which happened in the cartoon, sometimes as small throwaway jokes, would later show up in real life. A tiny moment buried inside an old episode would suddenly match something in the news, and fans would point at it and ask how the writers could have known. Most of these moments are just luck, or a smart guess, or a joke that happened to age in a funny way. A few of them feel stranger than that. The one that started this whole idea, the one almost everyone mentions first, is a soft little line about a future president. To understand it, the year matters. The episode came out in the spring of the year 2000. That was a different world. There were no smartphones in people's pockets. The internet was slow and made odd noises when it turned on. People still bought newspapers and watched the news on a schedule, and the whole country was gearing up for a big election later that year to choose a new leader. The Simpsons was already famous and already a little older than it had been in its early days, sitting comfortably in its 11th season. The wild, fresh excitement of its first years had settled into something steadier, a show everyone knew and most families watched together. And in that 11th season came an episode with a gentle, simple name. It was called Bart to the Future. The setup of the episode is calm and a bit silly, the way the show often is. The family takes a trip, and Bart ends up at a casino run by a Native American tribe. While he is there, an older man who works at the casino offers to show him something special. He offers to show Bart a look at his own future, a peek at the kind of grown man he will one day become. The whole thing is framed almost like a warning, a glimpse meant to scare Bart onto a better path. Bart, being Bart, expects something exciting and grand. What he gets is not what he hoped for at all. The future the show paints for Bart is a sad and funny one. As a grown man, he has not done much with his life. He has no real job. He plays in a band that goes nowhere. He still lives like a careless kid, leaning on other people, always sure that some big lucky break is right around the corner and somehow owed to him. The writers later explained that this version of grown-up Bart was based on real people they all knew, the kind of person who blames everyone else for how their life turned out and keeps waiting for a payday that never comes. So everyone in the writing room threw in ideas for what this lazy future Bart would say and do, each of them drawing on someone from their own lives. It was a group joke, stitched together from a dozen real people the writers had each met along the way. While Bart drifts along in this future, his little sister Lisa goes the other way. Lisa, the smart one, the one who always cared and always worked hard, grows up to do something huge. In this imagined future, she becomes the President of the United States. The show even makes a small point of it, giving her a funny title. It jokingly calls her the country's first straight female president, a sly little wink that hints America had already had a woman in charge before her, one who happened to be gay. It is the kind of quick, layered gag the show loved, a joke folded inside a joke. Lisa sits in charge of the whole country, doing her best to fix its problems, while her older brother is still chasing his next bad idea somewhere far below her. Then comes the moment. It is short. It is easy to miss if a person is only half watching. President Lisa is in a meeting with the people who help her run things. She is talking about money, about how the country is in a tight spot and short on cash. And she explains why. She tells the room, almost in passing, that they have all inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. That is the whole thing. She names the man who held the job right before her. She says the country was left short on money because of him, and then the scene simply moves on, the way the show always moves on, never stopping to explain the joke or point at it or make a fuss. It is dropped in and left behind in a heartbeat. The line may have flown by quickly, but it was placed there on purpose. The writers did not toss the name in at random or by accident. It was a small, deliberate choice, slipped in to fit the dark mood of the whole episode. The future the show was painting was meant to feel like a country that had gone a little off the rails, a place where things had slid downhill, and the name was chosen to match that gloomy picture. So while it looked like a throwaway, it carried real intent behind it. The writers wanted that exact name in that exact spot, even if they treated it as casually as any other gag. In the year 2000, that line landed as a funny idea and nothing more. Donald Trump, at that time, was known mostly as a rich businessman from New York. He put his name on tall buildings. He showed up on television and in magazines. He was loud and famous and easy to picture as a larger-than-life figure. For most people watching the show, the thought of him sitting in the most powerful office in the country was the kind of thing that made the joke land, because it seemed so far-fetched and so absurd. That was the point. The writers picked him because he felt like the biggest, boldest, most over-the-top version of a famous American, and dropping him into the president's chair felt like a wild, ridiculous stretch. Here is the part that makes the joke a little less wild, though, and it is a true part worth knowing. Around the very same time the episode came out, Donald Trump really was talking about running for president. He was looking at a smaller political group called the Reform Party, a party outside the two big ones that most Americans vote for. He spent some time in late 1999 and early 2000 testing the idea, giving speeches and interviews, seeing if people might back him. He even put out a book during that stretch, laying out his thoughts on the country and how he believed it should be run, the kind of thing a person does when they are seriously thinking about a campaign. In the end, that early try went nowhere and he stepped away from it. But it was real. He was a public figure who had openly placed himself near the world of politics. So when the writers reached for the most absurd name they could think of to be a former president, they reached for a man who had already, in real life, put his hand up and asked to be considered. The joke was built on something true, even if hardly anyone remembers that now. The episode did not please everyone when it first aired. A fair number of fans came away unhappy with it, though not because of the Trump line, which most people barely noticed at the time. What bothered them was the bleak, sad picture of Bart's future. People who loved Bart did not enjoy watching him grow into a washed-up failure, a man who had wasted his life and lost his spark. The gloom of it rubbed some viewers the wrong way, and the episode picked up a reputation as one of the darker, more downbeat entries in the show's run. The little joke about a future president sat quietly inside an episode that fans mostly remembered, if they remembered it at all, for being a bit of a bummer. The man who wrote the episode is named Dan Greeny. Years later, once people had started treating the line like some kind of magic trick, he spoke about what he had actually meant by it. He said it was meant as a warning to America. In his mind, a Trump presidency was the lowest point a person could imagine, the final stop on a long slide downhill. He described it as fitting in with a picture of the country going a bit mad, losing its grip, sliding towards something strange. The joke was dark on purpose. It was supposed to feel like the bottom of the barrel, the worst-case ending, a future so off the rails that it could only be a cartoon. He has also pointed out that the show had always loved poking at the loud, larger-than-life side of American life, and that in his view, a Trump presidency was simply that side taken to its limit. He was not trying to guess the future. He was trying to point at a fear and make it funny. Then time did its work. The episode aired in the spring of 2000, and the years rolled past quietly. 16 of them, to be exact. For most of that stretch, the line sat forgotten, just another small joke in a sea of thousands. Then came the year 2016, and the whole picture changed. Donald Trump ran for president again, this time for real, this time with one of the two big parties behind him, and he won. The same name that had once been the punchline of a throwaway gag in a cartoon was now the name of the actual president of the United States. The show itself had seen the connection coming as the campaign heated up, and it leaned into it. As Trump rose through the race, the people behind the cartoon made new short little videos poking fun at him, treating his run as fresh material for jokes. They had clearly noticed that their old line was suddenly looking less like nonsense and more like something real, and they could not resist tipping their hats to it. The writers, who had once buried the name in the background of a single scene, now found their own creation circling back to them as the world caught up to the joke. That was the moment the old clip came roaring back to life. People dug up the scene, played it over and over, and shared it everywhere. News outlets all around the world ran stories about it. Suddenly, a 16-year-old joke looked like a window into the future, and the show earned a brand new wave of fame for seeming to have called it. The image of President Lisa talking about the mess left behind by President Trump felt almost too perfect, like the show had reached forward through time and written down what was coming. Dan Greeny said he started getting calls about it, lots of them, all asking the same thing. He found the attention funny. He had always been proud of that episode, and now the world was finally looking at it, though for a reason he never expected. Of all the show's so-called predictions, this one became the most famous of them all, the first example anyone reaches for when the subject comes up. The honest truth behind it is gentler than magic, and in some ways more interesting. The writers did not know the future. No one handed them a crystal ball. What they had was a sharp eye for their own country, and a good sense of where its loudest, biggest energy was pointing. They took a famous man who had already flirted with politics, pushed the idea to its most extreme and absurd end, and used it as a joke about a country losing its way. The fact that real life later caught up to the joke says less about the writers being able to see ahead and more about how well they understood the place they lived in. They aimed at the most over-the-top version of America they could picture, and years later the real world wandered right into the spot they had been pointing at all along. That is the quiet secret behind so many of these famous moments. The show was rarely guessing the future. The show was simply reading the present very, very closely. There is one final twist to this story, and it is a recent and true one. Dan Greeny, the writer who dreamed up the line all those years ago, has now stepped into the world of real politics himself. He has launched his own run for president, the very job he once handed to a cartoon character as a joke. The writer who once imagined a future president from behind a desk in a writing room decided to try sitting behind the real one. Whether anything comes of it, no one can say yet. But it adds a strange and fitting bow to the whole tale. The man who wrote the most famous prediction in the show's history is now part of the very thing he once turned into a punchline. So the line that began it all turns out to be smaller and stranger than the legend around it. It was a dark joke, built on a real moment in the news, written as a warning rather than a guess, and forgotten for 16 quiet years before the world made it loud again. It is the perfect place to begin, because it shows exactly how these stories tend to work. A small, easy-to-miss moment, a long stretch of silence, and then a day when real life lines up with the cartoon so closely that people can hardly believe it was an accident. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That single line on the screen is famous because it used words. It named a person out loud. But not every one of the show's strange little fortune-telling moments came from someone speaking. Some of them were hidden in places far quieter than that, tucked into the background where almost no one was meant to look. One of the most surprising of all was never spoken at all. It was simply a sign on a building, sitting in the corner of a single shot, waiting nearly 20 years for the world to catch up to what it quietly said. Section 2. The sign nobody was meant to read. The most famous of the show's strange moments use words. A character says a name, makes a claim, drops a line, and years later the world matches it. Those are easy to spot, because they happen out loud and right in the middle of the action. But the show hid other moments in far quieter corners. Some of its oddest fortune-telling never came from a single spoken word. It came from the background of a shot, from a small detail painted onto a wall or a poster. The kind of thing made for sharp-eyed fans who like to freeze the screen and look around. One of these background details turned out to be one of the most jaw-dropping of them all. It was a sign on a building, and almost no one was meant to read it. The episode is from way back in the year 1998, during the 10th season of the show. It carries a playful name, When You Dish Upon a Star. The whole thing is about fame, and about how strange famous people can be up close. It begins with Homer doing something foolish, as he tends to do. He goes flying through the air on a wind-powered parachute, loses control, and comes crashing right into the home of two real movie stars. The stars are Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger, who at the time were a famous married couple in real life. In the world of the show, the two have left Hollywood behind and quietly moved to Springfield to get away from all the attention. Homer crashes straight into their private life by accident, dropping out of the sky and into the lives of two people who only wanted to be left alone. Instead of being thrown out, Homer somehow worms his way in. He learns their secret and promises to keep it. He starts spending time with them. Before long, he is acting as their personal helper, running errands and hanging around their house, thrilled to be close to such famous people. For a little while, it feels like a dream come true for him. He has stumbled into the glamorous world of the rich and famous, the kind of life he could only ever watch from the outside, and he cannot believe his luck. He soaks up every moment of it, glowing with the pride of being important by association. The trouble starts, the way it always does with Homer, because he cannot keep his mouth shut. He begins telling other people in town all the private things he has learned about the two stars. Word spreads fast, the way gossip always does. Their secret stops being a secret. The very thing they moved to Springfield to escape, the prying and the snooping and the endless attention, follows them right to their door because of Homer. Their peaceful new life falls apart, and the warm friendship that had grown between them and Homer curdles into anger. The dream he had been living pops, and he is left having ruined the very thing he treasured. Near the end of the episode, the story turns toward the movie business itself. A famous director named Ron Howard, playing himself, ends up with a movie idea that really came from Homer. The idea is gloriously dumb, which is the joke. It is a movie about a killer robot driving instructor who travels back in time for no clear reason, and there is also a talking pie somewhere in the mix. It is exactly the sort of nonsense Homer would dream up, a tangle of random ideas that should never work as a movie. Ron Howard, however, takes this silly pitch seriously and carries it off to sell it to a big movie studio, treating Homer's gibberish like the next great blockbuster. The studio he goes to is 20th Century Fox. And this is where the magic detail lives. As the scene shows the outside of the Fox studio, there is a large sign on the building, the way real studios have their names out front. The big letters spell out the studio's name, just as expected, but underneath, in smaller print, there is an extra line. That smaller line says the studio is now a part of the Walt Disney Company. It sits there for only a moment, in the corner of the shot, never pointed at, never mentioned by anyone. No character reads it aloud. No joke is built around it on screen. The story rolls right past it. A person watching at normal speed could easily go their whole life without ever noticing it was there, because it was tucked into the picture purely for the handful of fans who like to study every frame. To understand why that little line is such a big deal, it helps to know one thing about the show. The Simpsons is made by Fox. The very company named on that sign is the company that owns the show and puts it on the air. So the writers were not poking fun at some far-off business they had nothing to do with. They were poking fun at their own bosses, at the company that signed their paychecks and kept the lights on. They drew their own home and stuck a joke on the front of it about who might own that home someday. The studio that made the cartoon let the cartoon quietly imagine being swallowed up by Disney, and slipped that thought into the background where it could hide. It was a bold little wink, a company allowing its own show to joke about its own future, trusting that almost no one would even spot it. Back in 1998, the gag worked because of what Disney was at the time. Disney was already huge. It was famous for its movies and its theme parks and its cartoons, and it kept growing by buying other companies. A few years before this episode, Disney had bought a giant television company, one of the biggest such deals anyone had ever seen, and it made Disney even larger and more powerful than before. People in the entertainment world watched this happen and felt a creeping sense that Disney was on the march. So the idea floating around was simple and a little funny and a little uneasy. Disney was getting so large that it felt like it might one day own everything. The joke on the sign played on that exact feeling. It imagined a future where even Fox, a big and proud studio in its own right, had become just one small piece of the enormous Disney machine. It was a worry turned into a wink, a quiet little dig at a company that seemed to keep gobbling up the whole industry. For nearly 20 years, that sign stayed nothing more than a clever background joke, the kind die-hard fans might smile at and forget. It sat in an old episode, watched now and then in reruns, meaning nothing to almost anyone. Then came the end of the year 2017, and the joke stopped being a joke. Disney announced that it had reached a deal to buy a massive part of 21st Century Fox, the larger company that owned the 20th Century Fox movie studio. The price was enormous, a sum so large it is hard to even picture, tens of billions of dollars changing hands. And tucked inside that deal was the movie studio itself, the same studio shown on the sign, along with the show that had drawn that sign in the first place. The deal did not happen all at once or without a fight. Another huge company stepped in and tried to outbid Disney, hoping to grab the same prize, and the two giants pushed the price higher and higher in a battle to win it. In the end, Disney came out on top, and after all the paperwork and approvals were finally sorted out, the sale officially went through a little over a year later. When it did, the joke from 1998 became completely, literally true. The studio that made The Simpsons really was, at last, a part of the Walt Disney Company, exactly as that little line of small print had said it would be all those years before. The news landed, and almost at once people remembered. Someone dug up a screenshot of that old frame and shared it online, and from there it spread like wildfire. Fans pulled up the episode, found the moment, and pointed at that tiny line of small print from 1998. The smaller words on that cartoon building now described real life almost exactly. A studio that had drawn itself as a future part of Disney had, 2 decades later, actually become a part of Disney. The image raced across the internet, passed from person to person, each one amazed all over again. People could hardly believe a throwaway sign from an old cartoon had landed so precisely on something that took 20 years to happen, something tied to the show's own home and future. The people who made the show, though, were quick to keep things grounded, and their honesty is part of what makes this story so good. One of the men who ran the show at the time explained how the gag was born, and it was wonderfully ordinary. The scene needed a sign outside the studio building, the way scenes often need a small joke to fill a quiet corner. So a writer reached for one. The thought behind it was just that nagging feeling everyone in the business had back then, the sense that Disney was growing without end and would probably own them all sooner or later. The writer who came up with it later admitted he could barely remember how it happened. All he could recall was that general feeling that Disney would one day own everyone, himself included. Another of the show's leaders waved off the whole fuss too, treating it as a small gag that happened to age well rather than any kind of crystal ball. So the writers were not seeing the future. They were reacting to the present the same way the maker of the president joke had been. Disney was already on a buying spree, already powerful, already the kind of company that swallowed others whole. The writers simply looked at that pattern, pushed it to its most extreme end as a joke, and aimed at the wildest version of where it might lead. They guessed that the biggest fish might one day eat their own pond. Years later, that is exactly what happened. The gag came true not because anyone could peer ahead in time, but because the people writing the show understood the world they worked in and where its power was drifting. Once the deal was real and Disney truly did own the show, the writers could not resist joking about their new bosses out in the open. The cartoon that had once whispered the prediction in the background now made cracks about it plainly, tipping its hat to the fact that the old gag had come true. A show that had spent years quietly imagining this future suddenly found itself living inside it, and it handled that the only way it knew how, by turning the whole thing into more material for laughs. The prediction had closed its loop, and the show got to wink at its audience one more time. What makes this one feel different from the spoken jokes is how personal it is. The president line was about the whole country, a thing far away from the writers' own lives. This sign was about the very building they worked in, the company that owned their show, their own jobs, and their own home. They drew a small, funny prediction about themselves, and then lived to watch it come true, watching the cartoon's joke reach right back and reshape their real working lives. The cartoon imagined its own future owner and got it right, all from a single line of small print that was never meant to be read closely at all. Among all the show's famous moments, that quiet, almost hidden sign may be the most fitting of them, because it shows the writers turning their sharp eye on the world even when they were only filling an empty corner of a shot. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Both of these moments, the spoken one and the painted one, share something underneath. They were made by writers who watched the world carefully and thought a few steps ahead. That sharpness was no accident. The people writing the show were unusually clever, far more than most cartoons would ever need. And the proof of just how clever some of them really were was hiding in plain sight too, scribbled across a chalkboard in another episode, in the shape of a string of numbers and symbols that looked like pure background scribble. Only years later did anyone work out that those scribbles held an answer that some of the smartest scientists in the world were still chasing. Section 3. The smartest scribble on television. The two famous moments so far both came from writers who watched the world closely and thought a few steps ahead. That kind of cleverness was no accident. The people who made the show were unusually smart, far smarter than a silly cartoon about a yellow family would ever seem to need. Many of them had gone to the best schools in the country and had studied math and science at the very top level, and the clearest proof of just how sharp some of them were did not come from a joke at all. It came from a chalkboard covered in scribbles that looked like pure nonsense, hiding an answer that some of the smartest people alive were still hunting for. The episode is from 1998, the same busy stretch of years that gave the world the President line and the hidden Disney sign. This one is called The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace. The story is a sweet and slightly sad one. Homer hits a birthday that makes him feel old. He works out that his life is probably halfway over, and the thought hits him hard. He starts to think he has never really done anything important, that the years are slipping by with nothing to show for them. So he decides to change that. He decides to become an inventor, just like one of the most famous inventors in American history, a man named Thomas Edison, who came up with the light bulb and many other things. Homer becomes so obsessed with Edison that he tries to match him invention for invention, determined to leave his own mark on the world. The inventions Homer comes up with are exactly as ridiculous as a person would expect. He builds an alarm that beeps every few seconds the whole time nothing is wrong, which is useless and maddening. He makes a chair with a built-in toilet so he never has to get up. He even rigs up a shotgun that fires makeup onto a person's face, a wild and dangerous way to get ready in the morning. Each new gadget is dumber and more chaotic than the last, and the episode has a lot of fun watching Homer chase greatness and produce garbage instead. The whole thing is a gentle, funny story about a foolish man reaching far above himself. In one part of the episode, the show gives a quick image of Homer hard at work. He stands in front of a large dark board, the kind teachers use, and it is covered with lines of math. The joke is obvious and gentle. Homer is one of the least careful, least book-smart characters on television. He forgets things, breaks things, and rarely finishes a thought. Seeing him scribble away at serious, complicated math is funny all on its own, the same way it would be funny to see a toddler flying a jet. The math is there to make the picture silly. A dim man pretending to be a great genius covering a board with numbers he could never truly understand. For almost everyone watching, those scribbles were just background, a blur of numbers and shapes meant to fill the board and sell the joke. Nobody was expected to stop the screen and study them. They went by in a second or two and the story moved on. They looked like the kind of thing an artist might draw just to make a board look full, the visual version of pretend gibberish. And that is exactly how they sat for years, ignored, treated as meaningless decoration on the wall behind a cartoon dad. The few seconds of math hid in plain sight, watched by millions and truly seen by almost no one. Then a man named Simon Singh took a closer look. Singh is a science writer, but before he wrote books he trained as a real scientist of the highest kind, earning the top science degree there is, and studying the tiniest pieces that make up everything in the world. He had even spent time working at the very same giant underground laboratory that would, years later, become world famous for one particular discovery. He had always noticed that the show was packed with hidden math, far more than any other program on television, and he became fascinated by it. He spent a long time digging through old episodes, freezing frames, and working out what the background scribbles actually said. In time, he gathered it all into a book about the secret math buried inside the show. And one of the things he found on Homer's board left him stunned. One of the lines of math on that board was not gibberish at all. When Singh sat down and carefully worked it through, the math pointed to a real answer. It pointed to a number very close to the true weight of one of the most mysterious little pieces in all of science, a piece so tiny and so hidden that no one had ever managed to find it. The scribble that had been drawn as a joke turned out to hold a serious, almost correct answer to one of the biggest questions in the world, and it had been sitting there, in plain sight, on a cartoon chalkboard, for years. To see why that matters, it helps to know what that little piece is. For a very long time, scientists believed there had to be a special, hidden building block deep inside everything around us. They thought this tiny thing was the reason that anything has any weight at all, the reason a rock is heavy, and a feather is light, and a person can stand on the ground instead of floating away. It was such a grand and important idea that people gave the little piece a grand nickname. They called it the God particle. The trouble was, no one had ever actually seen it or measured it. It was only an idea, a thing scientists were sure must exist but could not yet prove. Finding it was one of the hardest jobs science ever took on. To go looking for something that small, scientists had to build one of the largest and most expensive machines ever made by humans, a giant ring buried deep underground, longer across than most cities, running beneath the border between two countries. Thousands of the brightest minds on the planet worked on it for years and spent an amount of money so huge it is hard to even imagine. They smashed tiny things together at unbelievable speeds over and over, hoping to catch a single flicker of the hidden piece they were chasing. It was slow, careful, painstaking work at the very edge of what people could do, the kind of effort that takes whole nations working together. In the year 2012, after all that effort, they finally did it. They found the hidden piece and measured how much it weighed. The whole world of science celebrated. It was one of the greatest discoveries of the age, the answer to a question that had puzzled people for decades. And here is the part that ties it all together. The line of math scribbled on Homer's board, drawn as a throwaway gag, had pointed to a number close to that real weight back in 1998. The cartoon had landed near the answer a full 14 years before the scientists, with their giant underground machine and their armies of geniuses, finally proved it. Honesty matters here, the same way it has in every one of these stories. The scribble was not a perfect bullseye. The number it pointed to was a good deal higher than the weight the scientists eventually measured, several times too big when the two are placed side by side. It was in the right neighborhood rather than dead on the dot. So no one should say the cartoon got it exactly right, because it did not. What it got was shockingly close for a silly joke on a children's chalkboard, close enough that a trained scientist who studied it for a living was amazed. For a background gag meant only to make Homer look funny, landing anywhere near the real answer was remarkable, and landing that near, years ahead of the discovery, was the kind of thing that makes a person stop and stare. The board held more than just that one hidden gem, too. Singh found other clever bits of math tucked into the same scribbles, each one placed there on purpose by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. One line looked like it had cracked a famous old math puzzle that is supposed to be impossible to solve, a riddle that had stumped people for hundreds of years. Punched into an ordinary calculator, that line even appears to check out, as if the cartoon had quietly solved the unsolvable. The truth is that it was a clever fake, a set of numbers built to look correct while being just the tiniest bit off, a trick designed to fool anyone who tried it without looking closely enough. Another line on the board dealt with the fate of the entire universe, with the question of whether everything would keep spreading apart forever or one day come crashing back together. These were not random doodles. They were real ideas, carefully chosen and carefully drawn. The real reason behind it is the most interesting part of all, and it is fully true and easy to prove. The show could put that math on the board because the people writing it actually understood that math. The writing room was stuffed with genuine brain power. Several of the writers had studied math and science at the highest level there is, earning the top honors that the finest schools in the country hand out. One of them had been so gifted as a child that he started at one of the most famous universities in the world when he was only 16 years old, studying mathematics there as a boy among grown adults. That same young genius went on to help run the show for many, many years, steering it through decade after decade. These were not pretend smart people drawing pretend smart scribbles. They were the real thing, hiding their true skills behind jokes about donuts and lazy dads. The writer who put that math on Homer's board was one of those deeply trained minds, a man who had studied real science at a top university and knew it well enough to slip a serious near answer into a cartoon and treat it as a punchline. He did not stumble onto the number by luck. By some accounts, he even reached out to people who were actually working on these very questions, asking around to make sure the math he was drawing would hold up under a close look. He understood the puzzle scientists were wrestling with, found math that fit, and tucked it into the background where almost no one would ever check. It was a private joke, written for the tiny handful of viewers smart enough to freeze the screen and work it out. To everyone else it was nonsense. To the few who could read it, it was a wink from one genius to another. That wink was not a one-time thing either. Once people knew to look, they found hidden math scattered all through the show, year after year. Clever number tricks painted on signs, tricky problems sitting in the background of ordinary scenes, little puzzles slipped into the corners of shots, placed there on purpose by writers who loved math and wanted to share it quietly with anyone paying close enough attention. The show became, in a strange way, a secret gift to people who loved numbers, a place where serious ideas hid behind goofy faces. The same group of brilliant writers went on to make another cartoon as well, a show about the future that they packed with even more math and science than this one. Their love of numbers ran so deep that one of them, faced with a tricky story problem in that other show, actually sat down and invented a brand new piece of real mathematics to make the plot work. It was a genuine discovery, not a fake one, a true bit of math worked out from scratch just to serve a cartoon. To this day, people who study math know that piece by the writer's own name. A working television comedy had produced an honest contribution to the world of mathematics, all because the people behind it were that clever and cared that much. The chalkboard full of scribbles was simply the most jaw-dropping example, the moment when a throwaway gag turned out to brush right up against one of the deepest secrets of the universe. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show then was clever enough to hide brilliant math in places almost no one would notice, but hidden math was not the only thing it tucked away where the world could not see. Sometimes the thing being hidden was not a number or a sign at all. Sometimes it was a person. There was a time early in the show's life when one of the most famous voices on the entire planet quietly walked into a recording booth and lent that voice to a single episode, all in secret, hidden behind a made-up name that fooled almost everyone. For years afterward, the people who made the show were not even allowed to admit who it really was. Section 4. The Secret Voice in the Hospital. The show was clever enough to hide brilliant math behind a goofy face. But math was not the only thing it tucked away where the world could not see. Once, very early in its life, the show hid an entire person. Not a drawing of a person, but a real one. One of the most famous human beings alive at the time, whose voice almost everyone on Earth would have known in an instant. He slipped into the show in secret, behind a made-up name, and for a long stretch of years no one was allowed to say out loud that it was truly him. The episode is an old one, from way back in 1991, near the start of the show's third season. In fact, it was the very first episode of that season, the one that kicked everything off after the summer break. It carries a strange name, Stark Raving Dad. It is one of the most loved episodes from the early days, the kind that older fans still talk about with a soft smile. And the reason it is so loved is tied directly to the secret hiding inside it. The story begins, as so many do, with a small mistake at home. Bart tosses his lucky red hat into a load of laundry full of white shirts. The red color bleeds out in the wash and soaks into everything, and so all of Homer's work shirts come out a soft shade of pink. Homer, not having anything else clean, heads off to his job at the power plant wearing one of these pink shirts. At work, this turns out to be a bigger problem than it should be. The way Homer looks and acts that day makes the people in charge worried about his state of mind. A short test only makes things look worse, partly because Bart fills part of it in as a joke. Before long, Homer is taken away to a hospital, the kind of place where people go to get help when they are struggling deep down in their minds. Inside that hospital, Homer is given a roommate, and this is where the heart of the episode begins. The roommate is a large, heavy-set man with pale skin and a soft, gentle way of speaking. The strange thing is that this big man talks exactly like Michael Jackson, who at that time was the biggest music star in the entire world. The man calmly explains that he is Michael Jackson. Homer, who pays almost no attention to pop music and has no real idea what the famous singer even looks like, takes him completely at his word. As far as Homer is concerned, he is now best friends with a global superstar, and he could not be happier about it. When Homer is allowed to go home, he brings his new friend along with him. Word of the visitor spreads through Bart first, who cannot resist bragging that the real Michael Jackson is coming to stay at the Simpson house. The news races through the whole town. Soon a huge crowd gathers outside the home, buzzing with excitement, desperate to see the famous star with their own eyes. When the big man finally steps out to greet them, the mood collapses. The crowd takes one look and realizes this is plainly not the real Michael Jackson. Their excitement drains away. They grumble, and they wander off feeling tricked and let down. Underneath all of this runs a quieter, sadder thread, and it is the part that gives the episode its warm heart. Bart, caught up in the thrill of the famous guest, has once again completely forgotten his sister Lisa's birthday. Lisa, hurt and feeling forgotten, is crushed. The gentle roommate notices her pain. He sits with Bart and helps him do something kind. Together they write a song for Lisa, a simple sweet little tune made just for her, called Happy Birthday Lisa. When they finally sing it to her, the gift melts her heart at once. The forgotten birthday is healed by a song, and a brother and sister are brought back together by the soft-spoken stranger who decided to help. At the very end, the man reveals the truth about himself. He admits that he is not Michael Jackson at all. His real name is Leon Kompowski, and he is a regular working man, a bricklayer from a town in New Jersey. For years, he had been an angry, unhappy person, full of bitterness he could not shake. Then one day, he began talking in the soft, kind voice of Michael Jackson, and something inside him settled. Speaking that way made people treat him gently, and it gave him a peace he had never felt before. As he leaves the family, he drops the famous voice and speaks in his own, a deep and ordinary one, finally ready to be himself again. Now comes the secret that turned this gentle little episode into a legend. The voice of that soft-spoken roommate, the man pretending to be Michael Jackson, was actually Michael Jackson, the real one. The genuine, world-famous music star himself walked into a recording booth and gave his real speaking voice to the character. The whole joke of the episode is a man who only sounds like Michael Jackson, and the cruel trick on the audience is that the man is dismissed as a fake, when the truth is that the audience was hearing the real star the entire time. How this came to be is a lovely story on its own. Michael Jackson, it turned out, was a true fan of the show. He liked it enough that he reached out himself, calling the show's creator one night and offering to come on and do a part. A guest spot was built around him, and the idea grew into this tale of a man in a hospital who believes he is the famous singer. One of the show's bosses had pitched the rough idea, and Jackson stepped right into it. A megastar at the peak of his fame chose, on his own, to spend his time voicing a humble, made-up bricklayer on a cartoon. The catch was that he could not let his name be attached to it. Michael Jackson had a deal with the company that handled his music, and the rules of that deal would not allow him to openly appear and be credited the way a normal guest would. So the show found a way around it. When the episode listed who had taken part, the part of the roommate was credited to a man named John J. Smith. That name was completely made up. It was a mask, a way to honor the rules while still letting Jackson take part. Because of that fake name, the public was left guessing. People could hear that the voice sounded uncannily like the real star, and rumors flew that it truly was him, but for a long time the people who made the show were not free to confirm it. The truth stayed locked behind a name that did not exist. There is one more layer to the secret, and it surprises almost everyone who learns it. Michael Jackson spoke as the character, but he did not sing as the character. The songs in the episode, including the sweet birthday tune for Lisa, were not actually sung by the real Michael Jackson. They were performed by another man, a singer, who could copy Jackson's voice so perfectly that listeners could not tell the difference. The same rules that forced the fake name also blocked Jackson from doing the singing for the show, so a gifted sound-alike was brought in to handle the songs, while Jackson handled only the talking. The man who told the touching story of writing Lisa's birthday song was the real star. The voice that actually sang it belonged to someone else entirely. The reason behind that swap, according to the people who made the show, is wonderfully odd. Michael Jackson supposedly thought it would be hilarious to use the copycat singer as a prank on his own brothers. The plan, as they tell it, was to let his family believe he had recorded a goofy little song for a cartoon, when in truth a stand-in had done the singing. A superstar pulling a private joke on his own family, using a children's show as the setup, is the kind of detail that sounds too strange to be real, and yet that is what the show's makers have shared about it. Over the years that followed, the truth slowly came out into the open. It became widely accepted and finally confirmed that the real Michael Jackson had been the voice all along, hiding behind the name John J. Smith. Fans came to treasure the episode even more once they knew the secret. It stood as a small, magical piece of television history, the time a man who was perhaps the most famous person on the planet quietly lent himself to a humble cartoon, asked for no credit, and helped tell a gentle story about a lonely man finding peace and a brother making up with his sister. The story does have a sad final chapter, though, and it is an honest part that cannot be left out. Many years after the episode aired, serious and disturbing accusations were made against Michael Jackson. People came forward with claims that he had harmed children, and these claims were brought to wide attention through a documentary that many people watched. The accusations cast a heavy shadow over everything connected to him. After much thought, the people in charge of the show made a difficult decision. They chose to pull the episode from circulation, to stop showing it, and to keep it out of the places where the rest of the show could be watched. The creators talked it over together and felt it was the only right thing to do. When the show later arrived on a major streaming service, where nearly every other episode could be found, this one was left off completely. So the episode ended up hidden twice over, in two very different ways. The first time, it was hidden by choice and by cleverness, with a real star tucked behind a fake name as a kind of playful secret. The second time, it was hidden by sorrow and by a hard moral choice, tucked away on purpose because of what later came to light about the man behind that voice. A piece of television that was once a delight to uncover became a thing the creators decided the world should no longer easily see. The same secret that made the episode special is the secret that, in the end, led to its disappearance. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show, then, was a place where real people could hide inside its made-up world, sometimes joyfully and sometimes in ways that grew painful with time. But the strangest trick of all worked the other way around. Now and then, something invented inside the cartoon, something that was supposed to be pure nonsense and could not possibly be real, somehow climbed out of the screen and into the actual world. There is one wild example of this, a plant that was never meant to exist anywhere but in a joke, and yet a real person, inspired by that very joke, managed to grow it with his own hands. Section 5. The plant that escaped the screen. Most of the time, the made-up things inside a cartoon stay safely inside it. A talking dog, a flying car, a monster under the bed, all of it lives on the screen and nowhere else, which is exactly how everyone expects things to work. The Simpsons broke that rule once in a way that still feels hard to believe. The show invented a plant so silly and so impossible that it could only ever be a joke. Then a real person, charmed by that very joke, went out into his own backyard and actually grew the thing with his own two hands. A creation meant only for laughs climbed out of the television and took root in real soil. The episode comes from 1999, in the show's 11th season, and it has one of the show's odder names, a title built around one of Homer's frustrated grunts. The story begins far away from any farm. Homer watches an old swashbuckling movie about a hero in a cape and a mask, the kind who flips a glove at his enemies and challenges them to fight for their honor. Homer, easily swept up in things, decides this is a brilliant way to get whatever he wants. He starts marching around town, slapping people across the face with a glove and daring them to a duel. The trick works at first. People are so confused and startled that they simply give him what he asks for rather than deal with this strange ritual. The fun comes to a hard stop when Homer slaps the wrong man. A polished gentleman from the South takes the challenge seriously, the old-fashioned way, and makes it clear he fully intends to settle the matter with a real weapon. Suddenly, Homer is not playing a game anymore. His life is genuinely in danger. To escape the threat, the whole family packs up and flees to a place from Homer's past, the old farm where he grew up with his parents long ago. It sits out in the countryside, far from town, and there the family decides to hide out and try to make a fresh start as farmers. Farming, of course, does not come easily to the Simpsons. The soil seems stubborn, the crops refuse to grow, and Homer has no real idea what he is doing. Plant after plant fails. The family's attempt at a simple country life keeps falling flat, and money grows tight. Homer, growing desperate for anything that will sprout, lands on one of his classic terrible ideas, the kind that should never work and somehow leads to chaos every single time. His plan is to mix things that should never be mixed. He plants tobacco seeds and tomato seeds together in the same ground. Then, to force them to grow, he reaches for something he should never have brought home in the first place. He uses the glowing fuel rods from the power plant where he works, the dangerous material meant to power a whole town, and he buries it near the seeds as a kind of monstrous plant food. It is exactly the sort of reckless shortcut Homer would dream up, and naturally it produces something no normal garden ever could. What grows from that poisoned patch of dirt is bizarre. On the outside, the fruit looks like an ordinary healthy red tomato. Inside, though, it is something else completely. When Bart bites into one, the inside is dark and stringy, more like the tobacco found in cigarettes than like any tomato. And the moment Bart tastes it, something strange happens. He cannot stop. He is instantly hooked, craving another bite the way a person craves something deeply addictive. Marge picks up the half-eaten fruit, looks closely, and sees the tobacco hidden inside the tomato skin. Lisa, the clever one, quickly works out what must have happened. The tomato seeds and the tobacco seeds had blended together in the ground and grown into a single unnatural plant. Homer, proud of his accidental monster, gives it a name that sticks. He calls it Tomako, a mashing together of tomato and tobacco. The fruit tastes genuinely awful. Everyone who tries it agrees on that. The terrible taste, however, does not matter at all, because the thing is wildly, dangerously addictive. One bite and a person needs more. Homer, smelling money, sets up a roadside stand and starts selling his strange red fruit to anyone passing by. Word spreads fast. People come back again and again, unable to resist, lining up for more of the very thing they know tastes horrible. The awful, addictive little fruit becomes a roaring success, and Homer thinks he has finally struck it rich. The craving spreads beyond people, too, and this is where the episode tips fully into madness. Farm animals catch the scent of the tobacco and lose their minds over it. Cows, sheep, and other beasts grow desperate for the fruit, breaking through fences and walls in their frenzy to get more. The hunger drives them to behave in ways no animal should, growing almost frighteningly determined, as if the plant has scrambled something deep in their brains. A simple roadside snack has turned into a force that warps everything that tastes it, animal and human alike. The success draws the attention of powerful people. A cigarette company, the kind that sells tobacco for a living, sees a golden opportunity in Homer's creation. Because the fruit is technically a kind of food, they realize they might be able to sell this addictive thing to children, openly and within the rules, in a way they could never do with normal cigarettes. So they come to Homer with an enormous offer, a pile of money so large most people would faint at the sight of it. Homer, blinded by greed, turns it down and demands an even more ridiculous fortune, a sum 1,000 times larger. The company refuses such a crazy price and walks away, and Homer's dream of unimaginable wealth begins to crumble. The ending spirals into pure cartoon chaos, as these things tend to do. The tobacco-crazed animals finally storm the farm in a wild stampede and devour nearly every plant, leaving just one fruit behind. The company bosses swoop in to grab that last surviving plant for themselves, hoping to keep the addictive treasure alive. As they try to make their escape by helicopter, a single sheep, utterly mad with craving for the fruit, attacks them in midair. The helicopter spins out and crashes, and the very last tobacco plant is destroyed in the wreck. The sheep, somehow, walks away without a scratch. And with that, the strange and addictive fruit is wiped from the world, leaving the family with nothing but the memory of Homer's accidental monster. All of this plays like complete nonsense, a goofy story built on an impossible idea. The surprising truth is that the idea underneath it is not impossible at all. Long before the episode aired, a famous science magazine had pointed out something genuinely true about these two plants. Tomatoes and tobacco are close relatives in the plant world, a pair of cousins from the same family of plants. Because they are so closely related, it is actually possible to join them together. And when that is done, the addictive substance that lives inside tobacco, the very stuff that makes cigarettes so hard to quit, can end up showing up in the tomato side of the plant. So the joke at the heart of the episode was sitting on top of a real fact. The cartoon dressed it up with glowing fuel rods and stampeding sheep, but the basic idea, a tomato carrying the punch of tobacco, was rooted in real science. This is where a real person enters the story. His name is Rob Bauer, and he lived in a quiet town in Oregon. Bauer was a science-minded man who worked as a scientist himself, spending his days at a plant that cleaned the town's dirty water. He was also a devoted fan of the show. When he watched the tobacco episode, something clicked for him. He knew a little about how plants could be joined together, and he remembered reading, years before, about the strange link between tomatoes and tobacco. The joke that most people simply laughed at and forgot lodged itself in his mind as a challenge. He started to wonder whether the impossible plant from the cartoon could actually be made real. So in the year 2003, a few years after the episode aired, Rob Bauer set out to grow a real tobacco. He did not need any glowing fuel or dangerous shortcuts the way Homer did. Instead, he used a normal, careful gardening method, the kind real growers have used for ages. He took the top part of a tomato plant and joined it onto the roots of a tobacco plant, fixing the two together so they would grow as a single living thing. Then he tended it and waited. Bit by bit, the joined plant took hold and began to grow. Against all odds, it survived. It grew strong, and it began to produce real fruit, fruit that looked, from the outside, like an ordinary tomato hanging on a vine. The impossible plant from the cartoon was suddenly alive in a backyard in Oregon. Bauer was both thrilled and a little nervous about what he had made. He suspected the fruit might be dangerous to eat, possibly carrying enough of the addictive tobacco substance to seriously harm a person. To find out, the plant and its fruit were studied and tested. The results were fascinating. The leaves of the plant were found to truly contain the addictive substance from tobacco, proof that the joining had worked the way the old science had suggested. The fruits themselves had their own strange little fates, and the story of what happened to each one is almost as odd as the episode that inspired it. The very first fruit was used up in the testing itself, destroyed in the process of being studied, and as it turned out, that first one carried none of the addictive substance at all. The next fruit was handed over to one of the people who wrote for the show, a small thank you and a perfect closing of the loop, the real plant going right back to the people who dreamed up the fake one. Another fruit was put up for sale on the internet, offered to whoever wanted to own a piece of this strange experiment. And one more fruit was eaten by a man who worked at a big technology company, a brave soul who took a bite of the real tobacco and, happily, felt no ill effects from it afterward. A made-up fruit from a cartoon had been grown, tested, gifted, sold, and even eaten in real life. The real tobacco plant did not last forever. It lived for around a year and a half. Even spending one winter brought safely indoors to protect it from the cold. After that stretch of life, the plant finally died, its strange run complete. By then, though, Rob Bauer had become a small celebrity among fans of the show. He had done something nobody else had, turning one of the cartoon's silliest inventions into a living, breathing thing. His fame grew large enough that the show itself took notice. When the 11th season was later released for people to own and watch at home, Bauer was invited to talk about his plant as part of the extra material that came with it. The fan who grew the joke ended up speaking on the very show that planted the idea in his head. The whole thing is full of funny little echoes between the real man and the cartoon. Homer worked at a plant tucked among forested hills and snow-capped mountains, and Bauer lived and worked in a place ringed by that same kind of scenery. Homer was a power plant worker who grew a strange plant by accident, and Bauer was a real plant worker who grew the same strange plant on purpose. The cartoon imagined a reckless dad stumbling into something impossible, and real life answered with a careful scientist who made that impossible thing on purpose, all because a television joke would not leave him alone. What lingers about this story is the direction it runs. So many of the show's famous moments are about the cartoon reaching forward and matching the real world. This one flips that around. Here, the real world reached up and grabbed something out of the cartoon, pulling a pure invention down into the dirt and making it grow. A plant that was designed to be impossible, a throwaway gag built for laughs, ended up living and fruiting and being eaten, all because one viewer decided the joke deserved to be true. The screen and the real world traded places for a moment, and a piece of pure fiction quietly became a fact. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show then could send its made-up creations leaking out into the real world in ways that delighted everyone. But its power to touch the real world did not always end so sweetly. The same show that could inspire a man to grow a happy little joke plant could also point its humor at a real place on the map and draw that place so harshly, so unkindly, that an entire country rose up in anger. One faraway nation grew so furious over the way the show painted it that its leaders spoke out against the cartoon in public and came genuinely close to dragging it into a courtroom. Section 6. The country that wanted to sue a cartoon. The show could send its made-up creations leaking out into the real world in ways that made everyone smile, like a joke plant grown in a backyard. Its reach into the real world did not always end so kindly. The same humor that could inspire a happy little experiment could also be aimed straight at a real place on the map, and once it was aimed so harshly that an entire country rose up in anger. The leaders of that country spoke out against the cartoon in public. Newspapers buzzed with the fight, and for a while it looked like a silly animated show might actually be dragged into a courtroom by a whole nation. The episode at the center of it all comes from 2002, in the show's 13th season, and it carries the name Blame It on Lisa. The trouble inside the story starts with something small and ordinary, a bill. Marge discovers that the family's telephone bill has climbed shockingly high, far more than they could ever afford. Someone has been making long, expensive calls to a faraway country, all the way to Brazil. The phone company, fed up with the unpaid bill, cuts off the family's service entirely. Homer, in true Homer fashion, hurts himself again and again trying to fix the phone on his own, making the whole mess worse. The reason behind those costly calls turns out to be a tender secret. Lisa finally admits that she is the one who has been calling Brazil. For some time, she had been quietly sending money to help take care of a young boy named Ronaldo, a child living in a home for kids who had no parents. Month after month, she had sent her support, and month after month, Ronaldo had written her warm letters back. Then, without warning, the letters stopped coming. Worried, Lisa called the home where the boy lived, only to be told that Ronaldo had gone missing and no one knew where he was. Her kind heart cannot let it go, so the family makes a big decision. They will fly all the way to Brazil, to the famous city of Rio de Janeiro, to search for the missing boy themselves. They leave baby Maggie behind with Marge's sisters and set off. The way the show chose to draw Rio is where everything went wrong. From the moment the family arrives, the city is painted as a wild and frightening place. The streets are shown crawling with monkeys, as if the famous city were some kind of jungle full of wild animals. Rats scurry everywhere. The poorer, crowded neighborhoods are shown painted in bright, cheerful colors, but with rats running all over them, and Homer makes a joke comparing the colorful scene to a bag of candy. The whole picture the show offered was of a place overrun with animals, mess, and danger around every corner, a city that looked more like a chaotic zoo than a real home to millions of people. The dangers the family runs into only deepen that picture. As they search the city for Ronaldo, things keep going badly. A group of children robs them in the street, taking their things. Homer climbs into a taxi and ends up being kidnapped by the very driver meant to help him, snatched away and held against his will, and in one of the most cartoonish moments of all, Bart is swallowed whole by an enormous snake. Every encounter the family has seems designed to show Rio as a place where a visitor cannot trust anyone and cannot turn a corner without falling into some new disaster. Crime, kidnapping, and chaos follow them through nearly every scene. The episode tossed in other jabs too. It made fun of a popular Brazilian children's television show, turning it into a crude joke. It got a real fact plainly wrong, telling viewers that a famous dance had been born in Brazil when it had not. There was a sweeter thread running underneath, with Marge slowly trying to teach herself the language spoken in Brazil so she could get by. But that gentle effort was buried under the pile of harsher gags. Taken all together, the episode offered a portrait of Brazil that was unkind, careless, and stuffed with the laziest and most insulting ideas about the country. The reaction came fast, and what makes it remarkable is the timing. The fury began even before the episode had aired in Brazil itself. News of how the show had drawn the city spread quickly, and the people whose job it was to welcome visitors to Rio were horrified. The group in charge of bringing tourists to the city, the people who spent their days trying to convince the world to come and visit, saw the episode as a disaster aimed straight at their work. A cartoon watched by millions upon millions of people around the globe had just told all of those viewers that Rio was a filthy, dangerous, monkey-filled trap. To the people working to lift the city's image, it felt like a punch in the gut. Their anger had a very practical root. The city had recently poured a huge amount of money into a campaign to draw tourists, spending millions to show the world how beautiful and welcoming Rio could be. They had worked hard to paint a picture of a wonderful place worth visiting. Then, in a single half hour, the most popular cartoon on the planet had splashed the opposite picture across screens everywhere. All that careful, expensive effort suddenly felt wasted, drowned out by jokes about rats and kidnappings. One spokesman for the city explained that what stung the most was the monkeys, the suggestion that Rio was some kind of jungle. To the people who loved their city, that image felt deeply unfair and completely untrue, a cruel cartoon version of a real and modern place full of real people. The fight quickly grew much bigger than a few upset officials. The group in charge of the city's tourism began looking seriously into taking the show to court. Their leader asked the lawyers to study what kind of legal action might be possible, to see whether the show could be made to answer for the damage they felt it had done. This was no longer just grumbling. A real place was preparing to fight a cartoon in a real courtroom. And then the matter climbed even higher, all the way to the top. The president of Brazil himself weighed in on the whole affair. He spoke out publicly against the episode, saying that it had given the world a twisted and untrue picture of what his country was really like. When the leader of an entire nation stops to denounce a single cartoon episode by name, it is clear the joke had landed far harder than anyone making it had ever expected. Faced with an angry city, threats of a court case, and a head of state speaking against them, the people who ran the show had to respond. One of the show's bosses stepped forward to smooth things over. He offered a real apology, saying sorry to the lovely city and the people of Rio de Janeiro for the offense. He could not quite resist adding a joke, though, even in the middle of making peace. He suggested that if a simple apology was not enough to settle the matter, then Homer Simpson would be happy to settle it the hard way, by stepping into the ring against the president of Brazil on a real television show where famous people boxed each other. It was a cheeky little wink tucked inside a serious moment, the show unable to stop being the show even while trying to calm a furious nation. In the end, the storm slowly passed. No real court case ever truly got off the ground. The threats of a lawsuit faded, and the leader of the city's tourism group eventually let his anger cool and moved on with his life. The legal fight that had loomed so large simply never happened. The people of Brazil had made their feelings loud and clear, the world had heard them, and after a while the heat died down. The whole affair could have ended there, as a tense moment that blew over. The writers of the show, however, were not quite ready to drop it. Instead of leaving the fight behind, the writers turned it into a long-running joke at Brazil's expense. The remark that had hurt the city the most, the one about the monkeys in the jungle, became a private target the writers kept poking at for years afterward. In a later episode, the show slipped in a line about Rio's monkey problem only getting worse, a sly nod straight back at the very complaint that had caused all the trouble. In another episode, the show leaned on it again through Krusty the Clown, joking that Krusty was constantly hassled by officials because his little monkey sidekick had come from Brazil, even tossing in a gag about the monkey's uncle holding an important job in Brazil's tourism office. The writers took the thing that had angered a whole country and quietly worked it into the show again and again, refusing to let the joke die. Looking back on the mess years later, one of the people who ran the show admitted that Brazil had truly caught them off guard. He noted that just about every other place the show had ever poked fun at had taken the teasing in good humor, laughing along the way most people do when their hometown gets a friendly ribbing. Brazil was different. Brazil did not laugh. The reaction was so strong and so serious that it surprised the very people who made a living being outrageous. Because of all the controversy that surrounded it, the episode became one the show rarely puts back on the air. A half hour that once aimed to be a fun travel adventure turned into a sore spot the show seems quietly content to leave on the shelf. There is a deeper reason the Brazil episode struck a nerve when so many others did not. The show had a long history of traveling to different places and gently mocking them, and usually it aimed its teasing at countries and cities that could shrug it off as equals trading friendly jabs. The Brazil episode felt different to many people because it seemed to lean on the cruelest and laziest ideas about a place, the kind of stereotypes that wound rather than tickle. The jokes felt less like a wink between friends and more like a pile-on, and that is part of why a whole nation pushed back so hard. A cartoon that usually got away with everything had, for once, gone after a real place in a way that genuinely hurt, and the place hit back with everything it had. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So the show was perfectly willing to drop real cities onto the map and turn them upside down for a laugh, even when it meant angering millions of people who actually lived there. That makes the next part all the more strange. For all its eagerness to point at real places and make fun of them, the show kept one location wrapped in total mystery, guarded like a treasure for decades. The town where the whole story takes place, the home of the Simpson family themselves, sat in a state that the show flat out refused to name. Fans argued about it for years, hunting through episodes for clues, desperate to figure out where, in the real map of the country, the town of Springfield was actually meant to be. Section 7. The town that refused to sit still. The show was perfectly happy to drop real cities onto the map and turn them inside out for a laugh, even when it meant angering millions of people who actually lived there. That makes its biggest secret all the stranger. For all its eagerness to point at real places and poke fun, the show kept the location of its own town hidden away for decades, guarded like buried treasure. The home of the Simpson family, the place where nearly every story unfolded, sat somewhere in a country full of states, and the show flat out refused to say which one. The town of Springfield existed everywhere and nowhere at once, and figuring out where it truly belonged became one of the longest, most stubborn mysteries the show ever offered. The question itself sounds simple. Springfield is in which state? A normal show would answer it without a second thought, the way most shows tell viewers where the characters live. The Simpsons never did. Across hundreds of episodes and many years on the air, the show danced around the answer, dodged it, buried it, and joked about it, but never once gave it straight. The family went on adventures all over the country and the world, yet their own hometown floated free, unattached to any spot on the real map. It was a blank space the show protected on purpose, year after year. Part of the trick lay in the name itself. Springfield is one of the most common town names in the entire country. Nearly every state has a Springfield somewhere inside it, sometimes more than one. The name is so ordinary, so widespread that it points to no single place at all. By choosing such a plain and repeated name, the show planted a quiet little seed in the mind of every viewer. A person watching from one state could easily imagine the cartoon town was the Springfield near them. A person in a completely different state could imagine the very same thing. The name was a kind of mirror, reflecting back whatever hometown the viewer happened to picture. The show did far more than simply pick a vague name and leave it there. It went out of its way to hide the answer whenever the subject came up. In one famous moment, Lisa stands in front of a map and actually points to the very spot where Springfield sits, the exact thing fans had been begging to see for years. At the crucial instant, Bart's head slides into the way and blocks the view, so the audience never gets to see where her finger lands. The reveal is offered and snatched away in the same breath. Time and again, the show pulled stunts like this, teasing an answer and then yanking it back, treating the location as a joke it would never let anyone win. Worse still, for anyone trying to solve it, the show planted clues that crashed straight into one another. One episode might drop a hint suggesting the town was in one part of the country, while another episode pointed somewhere completely different. Distances and directions never quite added up. Maps were drawn fuzzy or wrong on purpose. Conversations about the location were interrupted at the perfect moment, cut off just before the key word. The more a person tried to pin the town down using these scattered hints, the more the hints fought against each other. The show was not hiding a single answer behind a curtain. It was building a tangle of false trails designed to lead nowhere. The characters themselves seemed in on the game. Lisa once described the question of where the town sat as a bit of a mystery, the kind a clever person might crack by studying the clues carefully. The cruel joke buried in that idea is that the clues were never meant to lead to a real answer. They were bait. A viewer could spend hours lining up every hint the show had ever given and still end up more confused than when they started, because the writers had stacked the deck so that no honest solution could ever be reached. The promise of a solvable puzzle was itself part of the prank. None of this stopped the fans, of course. If anything, the impossible nature of the puzzle only made people more determined to solve it. Viewers pored over episodes, freezing frames, writing down every clue, arguing for years about what state the town really belonged to. People built long, careful cases for one answer or another, trading theories back and forth. And all across the country, in real towns named Springfield, people happily claimed that theirs was the true one, the place that had surely inspired the cartoon. Towns took a kind of pride in the idea. The blank space the show left open got filled, again and again, by the hopes of people who wanted their own home to be the famous one. The people who made the show enjoyed keeping the game alive. One of the show's animators once tossed out the playful idea that the town sat in a made-up state, a place that did not exist on any real map at all. It was a joke answer, a way of dodging the question while seeming to answer it, and it was never meant to be taken as the final truth. The show treated the whole subject as a toy to be played with rather than a fact to be settled. The mystery had become a beloved part of the show's personality, a running game between the writers and the millions of people trying to outsmart them. After decades of this, the man behind it all finally cracked the door open. Matt Groening, the creator who first dreamed up the show and its yellow family, sat down for an interview with a well-known American magazine in the year 2012. In that conversation, after all those years of dodging, he gave what sounded at last like a real answer to the question fans had chased for so long. The maker of the mystery seemed ready, finally, to tell the world where the town had truly come from. What he said tied the cartoon back to his own childhood. Groening explained that Springfield was named after a real place, the town of Springfield in the state of Oregon. The reason reached all the way back to when he was a boy. As a child, he had watched an old television show set in a town called Springfield, and he had loved the idea that it might be the very Springfield that sat near his own hometown. He had grown up close to a real Springfield in Oregon, just down the road from the city of Portland where he was raised. And as a kid, he liked to imagine the show on his screen was set right next door to him. When he got older, he realized the town in that old show had only been a made-up name. The dream stuck with him anyway. Years later, when it came time to name his own cartoon town, he reached back for that childhood feeling and chose Springfield. There was a second, cleverer reason behind the choice, and Groening admitted it openly. He knew that Springfield was one of the most common town names in the whole country. That was exactly why he wanted it. He figured that if his show ever became a hit, people all over the nation would assume the cartoon town was their Springfield, the one near them. He liked that idea. He wanted everyone, no matter where they lived, to feel a little spark of ownership, to believe the famous family lived just down the road. And that is precisely what happened. People everywhere did claim the town as their own, exactly as he had hoped. The real Springfield in Oregon sits about 100 miles south of Portland, the city where Groening grew up. The two places were part of the same corner of the world he had known as a child, the landscape that shaped him before he ever drew a cartoon. So the name on the screen, the one that had baffled fans for decades, traced straight back to a boy in Oregon, imagining that a town on his television was the one near his house. The grandest mystery in the show was, at its root, a piece of one man's childhood memory. Here is the twist that keeps even this answer from being clean and simple. Groening had spent years giving people fake answers about the town, and he admitted as much in that very same interview. Whenever someone told him the town must be their local Springfield, in whatever state they happened to live, he would simply smile and agree and tell them yes, that was the one. He did this on purpose, because he did not want to spoil the fun for anyone. He liked that people believed the town was theirs, and he was willing to lie cheerfully to protect that feeling. So when he finally explained that the name came from Springfield, Oregon, Even that confession came from a man who had openly built a habit of telling people whatever made them happy. He explained where the name was born, while the question of where the cartoon town actually sits stayed as slippery as ever. The show itself made sure of that. Soon after the interview spread and people began saying the mystery had finally been solved, the show fired back with one of its trademark little jokes. On the chalkboard at the start of an episode, the place where the show often slips in a quick gag, a message appeared declaring that the true home of Springfield was in any state at all except the one the person watching happened to live in. It was a perfect, cheeky refusal. Even after the creator had spoken, the show planted its flag right back on the side of mystery, telling every single viewer that the town was somewhere, anywhere, just not where they were. The game was not over. The game would never be over. The town's roots reached into the real world in other small ways too, hidden in plain sight for sharp-eyed fans. Many of the show's characters carry the names of real streets from Portland, the city where Groening grew up. The family's own street, the one their house sits on, shared its name with a road from his childhood. Groening grew up on a quiet, dead-end street, walking through the woods to reach his friends, and pieces of that ordinary boyhood ended up scattered all through the show, tucked into the names and places fans saw every week without realizing where they came from. There is even a small, surprising fact about the boy at the center of it all. Bart was very nearly given a different name. Groening had thought about naming the troublemaking son after himself, but decided against it before he ever pitched the show, and so Bart became Bart instead. What the whole saga reveals is that the mystery was never really meant to be solved. It only looked like a puzzle. Underneath it was a gift, carefully designed so that everyone watching could feel the famous family lived close by. The blank space on the map was left blank on purpose, so each viewer could quietly fill it with their own hometown and feel a little closer to the show they loved. The hidden location was not a secret being kept from people. It was a door being held open for them, an invitation to imagine the town as their own. The not knowing was the entire point, and the show guarded that not knowing far more fiercely than it would have ever guarded a simple answer. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show clearly loved a question it could leave hanging in the air. The location of the town was one kind of open question, the soft and endless kind, meant to stay unanswered forever. There was another time, though, when the show built a mystery on purpose, with every intention of answering it, and that mystery grew so enormous it swept up the entire country. It was a question about which a real prize hung in the balance, a riddle that had millions of people guessing, arguing, and racing to be the one who figured out the truth before anyone else. Section 8. The question that gripped a nation. The show clearly loved a question it could leave hanging in the air, the kind meant to drift forever without an answer. There was one time, though, when the show built a mystery on purpose and fully meant to answer it, and that mystery grew so enormous it swept up the entire country. It became a riddle with a real prize attached, a puzzle that had millions of people guessing, arguing, and racing one another to crack it first. For one long summer, a cartoon turned the whole nation into a crowd of amateur detectives, all chasing the same single question. To understand why it mattered so much, it helps to know the man at the center of it. Mr. Burns is the great villain of the show, the impossibly rich and impossibly old owner of the power plant where Homer works. He is greedy, cruel, and cold, the kind of man who would happily harm an entire town to make himself a little more money. Over the years, he has done countless rotten things, and just about everyone in Springfield has, at one point or another, had a very good reason to despise him. He is the man the whole town loves to hate, which turned out to be the perfect setup for what the show was about to do. The mystery began at the very end of the show's 6th season, in the spring of 1995. In that episode, Mr. Burns hatches one of his most monstrous schemes yet. He builds a giant device designed to block out the sun over Springfield, plunging the town into shadow so that people will be forced to burn more electric light, pouring even more money into his pockets. It is a breathtakingly evil plan, and it pushes the people of Springfield past their breaking point. By the end of the episode, nearly everyone in town has a fresh and burning reason to want Mr. Burns gone for good. The stage is set, and the whole town is simmering with anger. Then it happens. As the episode draws to a close, Mr. Burns is shot by someone hidden from view. He staggers and collapses, gravely wounded, and the screen cuts away before the audience can see who pulled the trigger. The shooter is never shown. The episode simply ends there, in the middle of the shock, leaving the most hated man in town lying wounded and the most important question unanswered. This was something the show had never done before and would never quite do again. It stopped the story dead at its most exciting moment and forced everyone to wait. The only true cliffhanger in the show's long history had arrived, and it left the entire audience hanging. What made the wait so unbearable was its length. The answer would not come in a week. It would not come for the whole rest of the spring or the summer that followed. Months stretched out between the question and the answer, a long empty gap with nothing to do but wonder. And wonder people did. Across the country, the question of who shot Mr. Burns became a genuine craze. People argued about it at work and at school and around dinner tables. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a favorite suspect. A cartoon cliffhanger had grown into one of the biggest talking points in the whole country, all built around a single unanswered shot. The show and the network leaned hard into the frenzy, turning the mystery into a real game with a real reward. They built a contest around it, inviting people everywhere to guess the shooter and win an amazing prize. To take part, a person could call a special phone number and submit a guess. The whole thing was tied together with the early internet too, which was a fresh and exciting idea at the time. The network set up a website devoted entirely to the mystery, a place for fans to dig into clues and chase theories. That website drew an enormous crowd, pulling in over 500,000 visits during that single summer, a staggering number for the early days of the internet. It became one of the first times a television show stitched itself together with the online world in such a big, public way. The prize on offer was the kind of thing a fan could only dream about. The winner would be drawn right into the show itself, turned into a cartoon character and placed inside an episode to share the screen with the famous family. For anyone who loved the show, that was close to the greatest reward imaginable, a chance to step inside the very world they watched every week. The contest had rules and steps to follow, though, and they were a bit complicated. People who called in were entered into a pool, and from that pool a group was chosen to actually make their guess. For it to count, both the person who called and the person they had phoned needed to be sitting at home when the answer finally aired. It was a fussy, careful system, and it would end up producing one of the strangest results of the whole affair. While the country guessed, the show piled on suspects. Because Mr. Burns had wronged so many people, nearly every character in town had a reason to want him hurt, and the writers made sure of it. They scattered hints and red herrings everywhere, pointing fingers in a dozen directions at once. One character after another looked guilty in turn. The strongest case of all seemed to land on Homer himself, who had his own bitter grudge against Burns, and a key piece of evidence even turned up that made Homer look like the obvious culprit. The writers wanted everyone to feel sure they had it figured out, and then to second-guess themselves all over again. The more people stared at the clues, the more tangled the whole thing became. When the answer finally arrived at the start of the 7th season, it landed like a thunderclap, because almost no one had seen it coming. The person who shot Mr. Burns was baby Maggie, the youngest member of the Simpson family, the tiny infant who never even speaks. The truth was that there had been no cold-blooded plot at all. Mr. Burns, in his greed, had tried to snatch a piece of candy right out of little Maggie's hands. In the struggle over the candy, the gun he was carrying went off by accident, and the shot that wounded him had been fired, unknowingly, by a baby. The most hated man in town had been brought down not by an angry mob or a clever schemer, but by an infant defending her lollipop. As shocking as it was, the answer had been hidden in the show all along for anyone sharp enough to spot it. The writers had planted real clues pointing straight at Maggie, tucked into the corners where most people would never think to look. In one moment, a set of letters appeared that, read the right way, could be seen as Maggie's own initials, a quiet little signpost left for the most careful viewers. The solution was fair. The trail was there. The trouble was that it was buried so cleverly, beneath so many false leads, that almost everyone walked right past it on their way to a wrong guess. The contest produced an ending almost as funny as the episode itself. Out of all the people chosen to make their official guess, not a single one named Maggie as the shooter. Every eligible guesser got it wrong. The rules, however, demanded that a winner be crowned no matter what, so the prize had to go to someone. With no correct guesses to pick from, the winner was simply chosen at random from the pool. The lucky person turned out to be a woman from the nation's capital, and in a final twist that fits the whole strange saga, she chose to take a cash prize instead of being drawn into the show, and by some accounts she was not even a viewer of the program at all. The greatest prize the show had ever offered, a chance to live inside the cartoon, went to someone who handed it back for money and barely knew the show to begin with. There is one more piece to this story, and it is the part that lingers in the mind. While none of the official guessers cracked the case, one ordinary fan, somewhere out there, actually did. The writers later revealed that they knew of exactly one person who had figured out the truth from the clues alone. This fan had worked it out and posted the correct answer, Maggie, on an early online message board, and they had done so on the very same day the cliffhanger first aired, months before the answer was revealed. Astonished and delighted, the writers wanted to track this person down and give them a special reward for their brilliance. When they went looking, though, they hit a wall. The fan had posted using a school email account that had since stopped working, a dead end with no way to reach the person behind it. The one viewer in the entire country clever enough to solve the mystery had vanished into the early internet, impossible to find. For years afterward, one of the writers kept trying to locate this mystery solver, hoping to finally hand over the prize they had earned, and as far as anyone knows, that person was never found. Keeping the answer a secret had been its own enormous challenge, and the show went to remarkable lengths to protect it. The people who drew the cartoon were worried the ending might leak out before it aired, so they came up with a clever defense. They drew not just one ending, but several fake ones, animating different characters as the shooter so that no single version could give the truth away. If a sneak peek of any one ending slipped out, it would point to the wrong suspect and fool everyone. The real answer stayed locked up tight until the moment it was meant to be seen. The mystery even spilled beyond the show itself, with a special program made in the style of the real-life crime shows that ask the public to help solve cases, treating the shooting of a cartoon villain as if it were an actual investigation. In the years that followed, the show could not resist poking gentle fun at its own giant mystery. In later episodes, characters would misremember who the shooter was, or joke about the whole thing in passing, little winks back at the summer that had gripped the country. The mystery had become a proud part of the show's story, the time a cartoon convinced an entire nation to play detective. And running underneath all the fun is that one quiet, almost sad note: the brilliant fan who solved the unsolvable and then slipped away forever, never to be found, never to claim the prize that was rightfully theirs. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show, then, could build a question and answer it, hide a town's home forever, and turn a single shot into a national obsession. It had one more trick that may be the eeriest of all. Now and then the show seemed to look at something rotten quietly brewing far off in the real world, something hidden and not yet exposed, and call exactly what was coming before anyone else could see it. There was one moment when the show took aim at a beloved sport, drew a picture of the deep corruption hiding inside the people who ran it, and did so a full year before that very rot was dragged out into the open for the whole world to finally see. Section 9. The Rot the Show Saw Coming. Of all the show's strange talents, the eeriest may be this one. Now and then it seemed to stare straight at something rotten quietly festering in the real world, something hidden away that the public could not yet see, and call out exactly what was coming before anyone else dared to say it out loud. The clearest example aimed at a sport beloved by billions of people across the planet. The show drew a picture of the deep, ugly cheating buried inside the powerful people who ran that sport, and it did so a full year before that very cheating was finally dragged out into the daylight for the whole world to gasp at. To feel the weight of it, the sport itself matters. The game most of the world calls football, and which is known in America as soccer, is the most popular sport on Earth by a wide margin. Its greatest event is a tournament held only once every 4 years, where the strongest national teams from around the globe gather to battle for the title of best in the world. Billions of people watch it. Whole countries grind to a halt to cheer their teams. It is a celebration so massive that nothing else in sports comes close. And sitting above all of it is a single powerful group, the organization that runs world soccer and controls this enormous tournament. That group holds staggering amounts of money and influence, deciding which countries host the games and steering the flow of riches that swirl around the sport. With that much power and that much money in one place, whispers had long floated around that not everyone running things was honest. The episode that touched this nerve comes from 2014, deep into the show's 25th season, and it carries a playful name borrowed from an old rock song, "You Don't Have to Live Like a Referee." The story starts somewhere small and ordinary, the way these things often do. At Bart and Lisa's school, the children are asked to take part in a speech contest, each one standing up to talk about the person they look up to most, their personal hero. Lisa, thoughtful as always, has a hero in mind, but she discovers that another student plans to give a speech about the very same person. Not wanting to copy, Lisa is stuck without a topic. Bart, of all people, offers a suggestion. He tells her she could give her speech about their own father instead. So Lisa stands up and speaks about Homer. She praises him for being honest and good, for having a kind of plain, dependable decency that she admires. It is a sweet and surprising speech, the kind of thing that catches people off guard coming from a girl talking about a father as foolish as Homer. Someone records the speech, and it spreads across the internet like wildfire, watched by an enormous number of people. Lisa's quiet words about her dad's honesty turn Homer, briefly, into a famous symbol of fairness and good character, seen by strangers all over the world. That sudden fame leads to an unlikely offer. The powerful group that runs the world's biggest soccer tournament takes notice of this newly famous honest man. They are looking for a referee, the person who controls a game and makes sure the rules are followed, and they want someone whose honesty is beyond question. Homer, thanks to Lisa's viral speech, fits the bill perfectly in their eyes. They hire him to be a referee at the great tournament, which happens to be taking place in Brazil. The whole family is flown out, with every cost covered, and Homer steps onto the world stage as a man trusted to keep the games clean. Homer turns out to be the most honest referee anyone could imagine, and the reason is wonderfully simple. He does not care about the sport at all. He barely understands it, and has no favorite team, no stake in who wins or loses. Because of that, he cannot be tempted to favor one side over another. Players try to sway him. Shady characters approach him with offers. Again and again, people attempt to slip him secret money to make calls go their way, the kind of dirty deal known as a bribe, where someone pays you in private to cheat on their behalf. Homer turns down every single one. His total lack of interest in the game makes him impossible to corrupt, and he calls each match with perfect, accidental fairness. The heart of the episode, and the moment that would later stun people, comes when an important official from the soccer group pays Homer a visit. This official speaks frankly about the state of the organization he works for. He admits that cheating and dirty dealing have spread through the entire group, that the whole thing is rotten straight to its core, soaked in secret payments and corruption from top to bottom. He describes a world where the people in charge are crooked, where bribes flow freely behind closed doors. And then, in a stroke that the writers surely meant only as a sharp joke, that very official is arrested for corruption right there, hauled off for the same crimes he has just finished describing. A man complaining about the rot is dragged away as part of the rot, all in a single scene. Homer's honesty does not last forever, sadly, and the show finds a clever, human way to break it. He keeps refusing the bribes for one reason above all, because he knows he is now Lisa's hero, and he cannot bear to let her down. Then Bart, unable to keep a secret, tells Homer the painful truth. Lisa had not actually picked Homer as her first choice of hero at all. He had only been a backup, chosen because her real pick was already taken. The discovery crushes Homer. With his reason for staying honest suddenly gone, his spirit collapses, and in his heartbreak he finally gives in. He accepts a bribe from a group of criminals, agreeing to fix the outcome of the biggest game of all, the final match, in favor of the home team, Brazil. The grand final pits Brazil against Germany, and it becomes the stage for Homer's redemption. During the match, a star Brazilian player, drawn as a poke at a real famous soccer hero, takes a dramatic tumble and pretends to be badly hurt, a sneaky trick players sometimes use to fool the referee into punishing the other team. By the rules, Such a fall could earn Brazil a free shot at the goal, the kind of golden chance that often decides a match. Homer stands at the crossroads. He has been paid to help Brazil. All he has to do is fall for the act. But in that moment he thinks of Lisa, of the honesty she once praised in him, and he refuses to be fooled. He waves off the fake injury and denies Brazil the free shot. With that one honest call, the tide turns, and Germany goes on to win the championship. Homer's choice nearly costs the family their lives. The criminals who paid him to cheat are furious at being betrayed, and they corner the Simpsons, ready to make Homer pay for his honesty in the worst way. What saves them is a small, lovely thread that had been woven through the whole episode. Marge had been quietly working to teach herself the language spoken in Brazil, struggling with it the entire trip. In the desperate moment, she pleads with the criminals in that very language, begging them to forgive her husband. On top of that, fate lends a hand. The leader of the criminals turns out to have a mother whom Lisa had shown a small kindness to earlier, swapping seats with her on the airplane. The grateful mother steps in, calls off her son, and the family is allowed to walk away unharmed. All of that played, in the moment, as nothing more than a funny and exciting story, a goofy adventure with a happy ending. Then real life caught up to it in a way that gave people chills. The episode first aired in the spring of 2014, just a few months before the real version of that great soccer tournament was held in Brazil. At the time, it looked like a timely bit of fun, a cartoon riffing on an event everyone was about to watch. But the truly startling part came roughly a year later. The powerful group that runs world soccer was struck by an explosive scandal. Top officials, the real people at the very top of the sport, were arrested and accused of serious crimes, charged with taking and giving bribes, with corruption that reached deep into the heart of the organization. Powerful men who had run the sport for years were dragged off and forced to step down in disgrace. The detail that left people staring was the match between the cartoon and the news. The show had drawn a high official of the soccer group, openly admitting the whole thing was rotten with corruption, and then being arrested for that very corruption. About a year later, in the real world, the real officials of the real soccer group were arrested for the real version of exactly that. A scene written as an outrageous joke had become a near-perfect mirror of an actual event. People pulled up the episode, watched that official get hauled away, and could scarcely believe the cartoon had laid out the scandal so plainly so far ahead of time. Once again, the show seemed to have peered around a corner the rest of the world could not yet see. Honesty, though, runs through every one of these stories, and this one is no exception. The show did not pull the idea of soccer corruption out of thin air, and the writers were not gazing into some magic mirror. Rumors and accusations about dirty dealing inside that powerful soccer group had been swirling for many years before the episode ever aired. People who followed the sport closely had long suspected that something was deeply wrong at the top, that bribes were changing hands and decisions were being bought. It was, in many ways, an open secret, the kind of thing plenty of people whispered about but few could prove. So when the writers built an episode around a crooked soccer organization, they were poking fun at a stink the world could already smell. They aimed their joke at something widely suspected and let the joke run to its most extreme end. That is what makes this one a story of sharp eyes rather than true fortune-telling. The writers read the rumors, understood where the sport's hidden trouble likely lay, and built a comedy on top of it. The fact that the real scandal broke open about a year later, looking so much like the cartoon, says less about the show seeing the future and more about how accurately it had read the present. The rot was already there, hidden but real. The show simply pointed at the spot where everyone half suspected it was hiding, and then reality came along and confirmed it loudly for all to see. The joke landed so well because it had been aimed at something true all along. The show even got one more thing right, though this part comes with its own honest twist. In the episode, the team that wins the whole tournament is Germany, and in the real tournament held that same year, Germany truly did win it all, lifting the trophy as champions of the world. On the surface, that looks like another uncanny hit. The honest details muddy it a little, the way honesty usually does. In the cartoon, Germany wins by beating Brazil in the final match. In real life, the road ran differently. Germany did crush Brazil in spectacular, history-making fashion, but that crushing came one step before the final, not in the final itself, and the real championship game was played against a different country entirely. So the show named the correct champion, which is genuinely impressive, while the exact path it imagined to get there did not match how things actually unfolded. The big answer was right, the fine print was off. What sets this episode apart from the others is the kind of seeing it shows. The president joke and the Disney sign were about reading where the country's loud public energy was heading. This one cut deeper, into a thing that powerful people were actively trying to keep hidden. The writers looked at a beloved sport, listened to the quiet rumors of corruption that others were too polite or too unsure to shout about, and put that ugliness right on the screen for everyone to laugh at. A year later, the law confirmed that the ugliness had been real all along, exactly where the show suggested it was. The writers had not guessed at random. They had taken a hard, clear-eyed look at a hidden sickness and named it before the world was ready to admit it was sick. That is a different and almost unsettling kind of cleverness, the kind that comes from paying very close attention to the parts of the world most people would rather not examine. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So much of the show's strange magic runs in one direction. The cartoon reaches forward through time, again and again, and seems to touch dark and difficult things long before they arrive. There was one occasion, though, when that flow reversed completely. A dark and terrible event in the real world reached back toward the show and forced one of its happiest, most harmless episodes into hiding. It was a gentle, beloved episode, built around a famous pair of towers that once stood tall in a great city. After a single tragic morning changed everything, those towers, and the cheerful cartoon that had once played among them, became far too painful for the world to watch, and the episode quietly slipped out of sight. Section 10. The episode the world could no longer watch. Almost all of the show's strange magic runs one way. The cartoon reaches forward through time again and again, and seems to brush against dark and difficult things long before they actually arrive. There was one occasion when that flow reversed entirely. A terrible event in the real world reached back toward the show and forced one of its happiest, most harmless episodes into hiding. The episode had done nothing wrong. It was gentle and funny and beloved, but it had been built around a famous pair of towers, and after one tragic morning changed the world, those towers, and the cheerful cartoon that had once played among them, became far too painful for people to watch. The episode comes from 1997, and it opened the show's 9th season. It was the 179th episode the show had ever made, a milestone deep into the run of a series that was already a giant. It carries a courtroom-sounding name, The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson, though there is no real trial inside it. The story is a simple travel adventure, the kind the show did so well, sending the family off to a big famous place and letting chaos unfold. This time the destination was New York City, the largest and most famous city in the country, a place packed with sights and sounds and crowds. The trouble starts, as so much trouble does, at Moe's Tavern. The men are drinking, and someone has to stay sober to drive everyone home safely. Through an unlucky draw, Homer's friend Barney is stuck with the job. Barney drives the drunken group home in Homer's car, and afterward Homer, feeling generous, tells Barney to just keep the car for the night and bring it back in the morning. Barney, however, does not bring it back. Instead, in a blur, he drives the car all the way to the heart of New York City and abandons it there, leaving it parked in a famous plaza right between two enormous towers. Then he simply forgets about it, and Homer's car is left stranded hundreds of miles from home. Time passes and the car just sits there. Days turn into weeks, and the abandoned car slowly collects a thick stack of parking tickets, one after another, piling up on the windshield. A heavy metal clamp is locked onto one of its wheels so it cannot be driven away, a punishment for sitting illegally parked for so long. Eventually, an official letter arrives at the Simpson home, warning the family that the car is stuck between the two towers and will be destroyed if it is not claimed and paid for soon. The family is faced with a choice. Most of them are thrilled at the idea of a trip to the great city. Homer alone dreads it, carrying ugly memories of a bad visit to New York long ago. He is outvoted, and so the family boards a cheap bus and sets off to rescue the car. Once they arrive, the family splits in spirit. Marge and the children are bursting with excitement, eager to wander the city and see everything it has to offer. Homer wants none of it. He only wants to grab the car and flee back home as fast as possible. While his family heads off to explore the sights, Homer trudges to the spot where the car has been sitting all this time, there in the plaza between the towers. He finds it buried under tickets, with the heavy clamp still locked onto the wheel. To free it, he has to wait around for an official to come and remove the clamp, a wait that could stretch across the entire day. So Homer settles in to wait, and his miserable day in the city begins. What follows is a string of the kind of small disasters that always seem to find Homer. He tries some strange street food that tastes awful, then washes it down with cans of an even worse drink, and soon he desperately needs a bathroom. The nearest restrooms are high up inside the towers themselves. Homer rushes to one tower, finds the bathroom closed, and then has to race frantically across to the other tower to find relief. The whole sequence turns the two towers into the setting for a frantic, silly chase, with Homer dashing back and forth between them while his car sits waiting below. The towers are not just a backdrop in this episode. They are woven right into the jokes, standing tall over nearly everything Homer does that day. A great deal of care and love went into bringing the city to life on the screen. The people who made the show wanted New York to look real and detailed, so they went to unusual lengths to get it right. One of the show's artists was actually sent to the city in person to walk around and take hundreds of photographs, capturing the streets, the buildings, and the towers from every angle. Those photos were brought back and used to build a careful cartoon version of the real place. The producers had chosen the towers as the spot for the abandoned car on purpose, because the towers were such a well-known landmark that audiences everywhere would instantly recognize them. One of the men behind the episode had even visited the towers himself back when they were first completed, decades earlier. The towers were drawn with affection as a proud and famous symbol of the great city. The episode turned out to be a real success. Critics enjoyed it and fans loved it. It earned a place on lists of the show's better outings, remembered fondly for its humor and its lively trip through the city. It even won a major television award, taking home a prize for one of the original songs featured in it, a catchy tune written specially for the episode. By every measure, it was a bright and happy chapter in the show's history, a well-made adventure that left people smiling. For a few years, that is exactly what it was. Nothing more than a beloved episode about a family's wild day in New York. Then came a morning that changed everything. On the 11th day of September in the year 2001, the two towers that the episode had played among were destroyed in a horrific attack. It was one of the darkest days the country had ever known, a tragedy in which a great many people lost their lives. The towers that had stood so tall over the city, the same towers the cartoon had drawn with such care, were suddenly gone. The whole nation and much of the world was left in shock and grief. A place that had been a proud symbol became, in an instant, the site of one of the most painful events in living memory. In the wake of that day, the cheerful old episode took on a heavy new weight. An entire half-hour stuffed with jokes set at the towers, an episode where Homer raced between them and his car sat parked beneath them, simply could not be watched the same way anymore. What had once been lighthearted fun now pointed straight at a fresh and terrible wound. The people in charge of showing the episode made a quiet, careful decision. Across much of the country, the episode was pulled from the regular reruns, taken off the air so that audiences would not be confronted with cheerful gags about a place that had become the scene of such sorrow. A beloved episode was set aside, not because anything about it had changed, but because the world around it had. The episode did not vanish forever. After several years had passed and the rawest pain had begun to ease, it slowly returned to the airwaves, finding its way back to television around the middle of the next decade. Even then, its return was handled gently. In some versions, certain jokes that pointed too directly at the towers were trimmed away, softening the episode so it would sit easier with viewers. A heavily edited version made the rounds, while the full original episode could still be found untouched on the home video collections fans could buy, and it stayed in regular rotation, uncut, in some other countries. The episode lived on, but for a long while it carried an asterisk, treated with a special tenderness no other episode needed. There is one more layer to this story, and it is the part that turned a sad tale into a strange one, the kind of myth that fits a show like this perfectly. Years after the attack, sharp-eyed fans noticed something unsettling tucked into the very same episode. In one quick shot, a character holds a little booklet advertising the city, and the booklet shows a price of $9 printed right next to a drawing of the two towers. From a certain angle, the 9 and the pair of towers standing beside it can be read as the numbers 9 and 11, the very date of the attack. To people looking back after the tragedy, it seemed as though the episode had somehow hidden the date of the disaster in plain sight, years before it happened. The image spread widely, held up as perhaps the most chilling so-called prediction the show had ever made. The honest truth behind that image is far calmer, and the people who made the show have explained it plainly. The price of $9 had been chosen for one simple reason, because it was a funny, almost absurdly cheap fare to advertise. A little joke about how cheap a trip to the city could be. There was no hidden meaning, no secret date, no warning buried in the art. One of the show's longtime writers admitted that the resemblance was genuinely bizarre, and that he could not explain how it had come about, calling it a strange and unsettling coincidence. Another of the men who made the episode granted that the whole thing did feel eerie, especially because it appeared in the one and only episode ever made that was packed with an entire stretch of jokes set at the towers. The honest answer is the simplest one. The people who made the show were never looking into the future. They were looking very hard at the present. They knew the world they lived in, the people who ran it, and the directions it was already drifting, and they took those real things and pushed them to their most extreme, most absurd ends, because that is where the best jokes hide. Across more than 30 years and thousands of small gags, a handful of those wild guesses were always going to land. And the ones that landed were never random. They were the jokes built on something already true, something already moving the way the writers had quietly noticed it was moving. So there was no crystal ball, and there was no magic. There was only a room full of sharp, curious minds paying closer attention to the world than most people bother to, and then time doing the rest, while reality slowly wandered into the spots they had already pointed at. A cartoon that seemed to see the future was really a cartoon that saw the present clearly, and trusted that the rest would follow on its own. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.